Well, hello and welcome to the Heart of England Speakers podcast. My name is Pierre and I'm your host. Please join us every first and third Tuesday of the month. For all details, go to hotspeakers.org.uk. Welcome, everybody, to the third season of the podcast. I can't believe it's the third season. And this season, we're going to try to widen our discussion about public speaking and communication. And my first guest for this season is a friend of mine. His name is Eric Gallina. Hello, Eric.
Hello, Pierre-Paul. How are you?
I'm good. Ça va?
Yeah, très bien, merci.
Yes, as you can see, we can even do the interview in French, and we'll get all into that. So, Eric, welcome. So, I like, introduce yourself. So, first question is, where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
New York City.
Yeah. So my parents are both French, but they met in the States in New York, where I came to be.
Very nice. Yeah. Nice French too, by the way.
Yeah.
So what did you study in? You went to school in New York then?
Yeah. So I mean, my early formative years I spent in New York City. My mother worked for the United Nations, so I went to the United Nations International School up until I got kicked out, basically, to be frank. It was a school that went on from the early years until graduation in high school. And, in high school, I went through periods, as many of us do, where I was a bit rebellious. And I decided to go and watch movies in the West Village instead of going to class. So my grades suffered clearly as a result. And but it was good. I went to a different school, and it's still an international crowd, as New York is. That's what I love about that city. It's a melting pot of various different cultures and people and backgrounds. And so I ended up going to another school, a much smaller school called Dwight on the Upper East Side, just for 2 years before I graduated, and then went to a, again, very small liberal arts university up in Boston, which was extremely small, but had a very international population, which is why I chose it. I love being around people of different backgrounds. I feel that you gain a lot from people's experience, and I love intermingling with other people for that very reason.
Okay. So what did you study at that college?
So at that college, I went in there not knowing anything about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I've always loved cars, but obviously that wasn't an option. But I studied communications because I really like talking to people. I love finding out things. I'm very inquisitive. I just ended up going with that, it was called Communication and Culture, which I thought kind of fit me perfectly. I knew I loved movies. I knew I liked, watching TV. And for me, communications, I was pretty good in English, but it wasn't all about words. So communications, for me, I really saw myself going into TV, which I eventually did upon graduation. But
okay.
So that's a different side of things.
Now we got to get into that television. So what happened? What you get into television then?
So after I graduated school, my then girlfriend, now wife, she is from a lot of different places in the world. Her mother's from California. She's Lebanese, but was born and raised here in London. When we met, we went out to visit California. I'd never been. It was our junior year of university, and we went to San Diego. And San Diego was
not bad.
Absolutely fantastic place for a young adult, and it was just a playground. There was the beach. It was just absolutely gorgeous, and I fell in love with it. And it was great because my wife is actually a scientist. It was perfect for her, and for me, I was thinking, hey, it's not too far from LA. Maybe I could get something in the television or movie industry. Yeah. And so we basically planned to move out to California when we graduated. We planned that entire senior year to move out. And so saved up a bit of money. And then when when we got that degree in hand, we packed up the Jeep with all of our worldly possessions, 4 boxes in total. And we lived out of a tent for about 6 weeks while we did the
Oh, wow.
cross country journey. It was
Wow.
brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Very nice. How long did you stay in California?
So I moved out to California end of '99.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved and I stayed there until I got accepted into university, or I should say the Master's in Automotive Journalism program at Coventry University.
Ah.
The plan was really just to go out for a year. So, I started when I was in California, I did a bunch of different jobs. I started off in TV, but I ended up, it was the start of the internet. And so I was cold emailing people. I'd read an article about how this one guy, Matt Davis, wrote for Automotive News. And he published an article about why French cars were unsuccessful in the US market. And I obviously, I wrote him back and I said, I'll tell you why French cars are unsuccessful in the US market. And then, at the end of the email, I basically said, hey, how can I do what you do? And he gave me a couple of pointers. And from there, I kind of ended up getting into PR. In San Diego at that time, it wasn't automotive. It was, working with hospitality, real estate, things like that.
Hold on a
There was
second.
a whole lot
Did
of
he?
building going on.
Hold on a second. Back
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Did he like your rebuttal about French cars?
Yeah, I think he did. I mean, he did tell me that it made sense, but at the same time, I don't think the French manufacturers ever really understood what it took to make it in the U.S. market.
Yeah.
They were, there's a lot of that going on still. I mean, people that are risk averse, you got to go all in sometimes. And pulling certain shall we say niche vehicles was not an ultimately smart decision, because Peugeot at the time, like the 405 Mi16, like that was pulled from the US market, and that was a really bad decision. Renault's marketing of Le Car,
Yeah.
which is what it was called in the States, was
Yeah.
disastrous. So there was a lot of things that they were doing, that was quite pitiful. French cars weren't always great, but
No.
Italian cars weren't any better, and they still managed to be somewhat successful in the US in certain niches, like Alfa Romeo, and now with FCA it's a completely different playing field. But anyway, I just think that the French would have, I think they would have done a lot better. And yeah, ultimately he did appreciate my argument, but nothing ever came to fruition from the French manufacturer side, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. So obviously, yeah, you love New York, I'm guessing, and then
Yeah,
you
of
get
course.
to this, of course. Then you got to discover LA, which I'm sure you enjoy. Well, San Diego, LA, which I'm sure you enjoyed, and now all of a sudden you have Coventry on the horizon. How did they figure out in their plan, I guess?
Well, San Diego, I loved. I'll just wrap that up real fast.
Yep.
It was great just because it was perpetual summer, but at the same time, somebody that grew up in New York, I'm used to seasons, right? I'm used to watching fall, spring, all of those. Yeah, the leaves changing, exactly. And coming to life and dying. And so it was like I missed that. And LA, I never really liked. If you're from New York, you don't really like LA. Like that's just, it's the coasts, it's too different, it's so spread out, so I only spent 9 months up in LA, and I only ended up living there kind of in a room like I am now during the week, and going back to San Diego on the weekends because I'd found a job in the automotive industry. And I was writing for Auto Media up in LA and doing shoots, working as an agency for Ford and things like that, and that was great. But I also wanted to further my career. And at that point, I'd been accepted to the degree, to the Coventry University degree or program. And so that was when we arrived there, man, I'll tell you, I'd been to London before, I'd been to the UK, but arriving in Coventry in the tail end of summer, that was culture shock, man. That was the maximum. That was really quite a change. I didn't. And now, obviously, I know how different things can be when you're talking about a cosmopolitan city like London versus anywhere else in the United Kingdom, right? It's quite different. It's like, being in New York City, but then people are like, oh yeah, I've been to the States, I've been to Houston, and you're like, yeah, and that's nothing to do with New York. It's zero. And it's pretty much the same, except on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah,
I went to obviously I moved from Detroit and I got to Coventry about the same time, end of August. So yeah, it's I was like, oh, okay, that's different. But anyway.
yeah, very different. No, but I mean, one thing I can say positively about Coventry is it's centrally located.
Mhm.
There's if you've got a car, that's great because you can get out easily and go a
Yeah.
lot of different places. But no, I did I made some really good friends up there. People I'm still in touch with now. It was only 6 of us on the whole thing at the end of
Oh
it.
wow.
Really, really small, tight-knit community. All of us ended up getting jobs in the automotive industry somehow. Some of us ended up in PR, as I am now. But yeah, it was really just a great camaraderie, a good
Awesome.
time, a good year. And we only spent a year there.
Nice. Okay. So you finished Coventry, so then what?
Yeah, so I finished Coventry, and then the plan was really only to go there for a year, and then move back to California. But my wife, it was easy to get her out of California and come back to her birthplace.
Mhm.
But it was kind of, once we were there, we were like, oh yeah, why don't we spend a year here, and check it out, work, see what it's like. And we, ended up, I started freelancing again. I started, I was freelancing when I was in California. I covered the Baja 500. I worked as a photographer as well as a writer, just because it was easier to sell a story when you had visuals as well,
Mhm.
and words combined. So I ended up doing that, writing about bits that were happening in Europe for the US market. And then I was also freelancing. When I was in university, I did some internships at Autocar, at Evo. I mean, some really
Okay.
cool places.
Yeah.
And so, and Auto Express. And um, basically, I ended up getting in touch with a guy by the name of Dennis, who was basically running at the time Evo and Auto Express were part of damn, I'm blanking on the name now. It was like this publishing agency that they've since sold it off.
Mhm.
It's no longer who it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was these two publications were together as part of the same publishing house, and I was basically working part-time on Auto Express, as well as doing freelance bits. And also I ended up working part-time for a company called Car Design News,
Mhm.
which the whole way that happened was one of my professors at Coventry University was a guy named Nick Hull, and
Yeah.
he was a designer. He'd worked, in a variety of different places, and he was teaching automotive design at Coventry.
Mhm.
And so he also taught a module um, for us automotive journalists. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I remember meeting him through that.
Hmm.
And ultimately, I ended up writing my first article about the degree show, the automotive design degree show at Coventry University.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was my first assignment kind of for them. And then, they were a small new company. They were starting to pick up. And so they hired me on part-time at the same time I was working at Auto Express. And, and then ultimately one day, this guy, Dennis, he was like, oh yeah, you've been working here like, 7 months or whatever. I want to bring you in and give you like a full-time gig. And I was like, sweet, this is excellent. Yeah, of course. And he said, yeah, we're launching this new website. Um, and it's basically all about the used car market in the UK. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what the, I just got off the boat, man. I don't know anything about the used car market in the UK. But they wanted to do something that was basically a piston heads rival. They wanted to do something that
Ah.
could compete on that level. And the name of the publication was something horrendous. It was like I can't even remember what it was. It was bad. It was like, car club or something silly. And
Okay.
anyway, regardless, I was working at the same time with this company, Car Design News, and so I went to these guys, small group, three guys, and I was like, look, I've just been made this offer, full time. Can you match it? And they kind of went back and they did. And ultimately I turned down the used car, job or the new publication. I mean, it would have been exciting anyway. It was a new online publication,
Yeah.
but I turned that down in order to really go deep dive into the car design scene. And that's how I started Design News. This was 2005.
Yeah,
Six. Yeah.
for our listeners who are not familiar, Car Design News is now one of the premier websites for car designers. So that was pretty big deal, I suppose, especially if it's when it started. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the first. I wouldn't say that they're doing it great, but they do have the market cornered.
Yeah, it's all about establishing your brand, right? So if you're first there.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, just to go off on another kind of tangent,
Yep.
when I was a kid and I was reading magazines like Automobile, Motor Trend, Car and Driver in the US, they always had a little component for automotive design. And I think Robert Cumberford did it best in Automobile when he was actually, and that's where all of these things came from. I mean, Car Design News isn't a unique thing. It was styled after Auto and Design and Car Styling, which is a Japanese magazine. So, but they each took their different take on it. Obviously, Auto and Design, Italian, different, very different format and style than Car Styling. And then obviously Car Design News was online. And I've only ever worked online. So for me, it was perfect.
Very nice. So how long have you stayed at Car Design News?
So Car Design News, I stayed there about 6 years. Yeah, I was employee number one. It was these three guys that were running it.
So, and during that time, what did you do at Car Design News? Also, was important to know.
Yeah, so during that time, when I joined Car Design News, I joined as a sub editor. Okay. Basically, they were writing the content. They just wanted it to be, proofread, condensed, made into a, into a piece that was more easily to deliver online. And I was doing some writing as well, but my role was sub editor when I was freelance contracting. Then when I joined, they made me news editor. And so I was in charge of, basically finding out everything that was going on in the automotive industry and, getting the news bits that were pertinent to automotive design and writing about that and publishing it. And basically after less than 3 years, I was promoted and I became editor. At which point, it wasn't that much of a change. I just had, more of a final say, but I was always kind of commissioning people and, getting others to write stories and, editing them and whatever I needed to do, making sure that photography was on par, et cetera, et cetera. That was a great job. I enjoyed it, but I was employee number one. So, when those three guys decided it was time to move on, it was 2008. It was the recession. They, put the company up for sale and they sold it. And I remember I wasn't privy to these conversations, but I did ultimately get a call from my my then boss, Sam. And he was like, Eric, I was getting married. I was in Paris getting married, and I get this text message from Sam saying, "Hey, Eric, well, when do you get back to London?" And I'm thinking, yeah, like, why in the hell is this guy writing me as my wedding? Like, he knows I'm getting married. Why is he bothering me? And so I write him back. I'm like, hey, Sam was like a friend of mine. He still is to this day, but it was weird to get that text message. I say, hey, yeah, I'm getting back on this day. And I'm thinking, the whole time I'm thinking like, do I still have a job? Like, what's going on? Like, I
Yeah.
know it's 2008. It's not great in terms of the economy, right?
Right.
And so I write him back and I'm like, yeah, I'm coming back. I arrive at, King's Cross, the train station at this time, but then I've got like a 4-hour window and I've got to get on a plane and go off on my honeymoon. And he's like, okay, I'll meet you at the train station.
Wow.
I'm panicking now, right? And ultimately he just wanted to tell me, like, he showed up with this map quest. Remember that? Like
Yeah.
pre Google Maps, I
Google
think.
Maps. Yep.
Yeah. He came up with his printout saying, this is where you report to when you come back. It's like, okay.
Oh, okay.
So I still had a job, but I ended up
Good.
working for a bigger company.
Yeah.
And that came with its own challenges as well, because obviously it was 2008. And so not that many things were happening in the industry at the time, and budgets were tight.
Right. Right. Okay. So hopefully you had a good honeymoon and you come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
all right. So then what?
So basically come back from Namibia. Again, I love road trips. For me, that's the best and the ultimate holiday, right? And so I think we were down there for like 2 weeks, maybe 3. And we basically lived out of this Toyota pickup truck. And we stayed in a couple of cool places, but we were just driving on these dirt roads for like 8 hours, and that was brilliant. But anyway, so I come back, ended up putting my feet under the desk thinking, yeah, I'm going to get all sorts of cash injection coming my way. We're going to be able to do some brilliant things with this brand. Like, all right, this is amazing. It's happening. And come to find out that the only thing they were interested in was the brand name. They just wanted to basically acquire it because it was known. And they made zero investment into it. I mean, it was a team of 4, including myself. Obviously, it went down to a team of 1. The only thing that grew was the sales team. I mean, the sales team outnumbered the editorial team 5-1. It was all they were trying to do was sell off the back of it. And I was like, but yeah, I was the only one creating content.
Wow.
So that was a challenge. And then ultimately, they didn't want to, hire people. So I had to hire part-timers, which ultimately, made into one whole person. I had like 2 guys working 2 days a week and 3 days a week. And so they were kind of helping me out, but I was trying to commission people, but they weren't getting paid. I mean, it was a fiasco. Yeah. And it was challenging times, but I stuck it out because I loved it. I loved writing about automotive design. And I loved working with the people that I worked with, like, from a design industry perspective.
Okay.
I met so many cool people. I mean, one of my first interviews was Chris Bangle. Like,
Nice.
it just doesn't really get better than that. And Chris was like, head of BMW Group, not just BMW brand, like BMW Group. Like, so I'm talking to him about Rolls Royce and Mini, and he was just so down to earth. He was such an amazing guy, and he made me feel super comfortable. And he made it like, and this is what I really value about Chris, is doesn't matter what level he's at, he really identifies with you and he's there, he's on the same level as you are.
Okay.
He doesn't, it's not like, I'm superior. There is none of that going on. It's you really feel like you can talk to him and like a one-on-one, like a peer, it's amazing. So
Nice.
I had a lot of great opportunities like that.
Okay. So what made you, I'm sure at some point you said, I gotta go. So what was the trigger for you?
So working, under these challenging circumstances, like I said, I'd been freelance before, and I wanted to go out and be freelance again. I was like, look, now I've interviewed so many people in the industry. People know who I am, and I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to wing it, and I'm going to do this for other publications. Not for this one anymore, but go out and start writing about automotive design for whoever. And so I did end up working for Auto and Design. I wrote some pieces for Automotive News. I mean, for a bunch of different, and then I also branched out and started doing more mainstream stuff. I did work with Rory Reid, former Top Gear presenter, for a publication he was running at the time. I really enjoyed, like, working and pitching articles and then working on whatever it is that I'd pitched. Like I wrote for Petrolicious, I wrote this one article about the Lamborghini Miura and the history and the design history. And I spoke to people at Bertoni about that. And, I really went into deep into like how that car was created. And yeah, I mean, I just loved being able to do that. But at the same time, and this is where the next kind of stage came in, I ended up, I would get commissions for these articles. People would buy it and be like, yeah, that's a good story. And then they'd be like, all right, can you write, 1,000 words for Tuesday? And it's like, yeah, but then, what am I going to do with the other 6,000 words I got, And that was the thing. It's like, you talk to somebody like Bengal for 20 minutes, you've got 6,000 words easy.
Yeah.
And, you could condense that into, 1,000 words, but what do you do with the rest? And so that's why I just basically decided to start a website. I put everything into a website that I wasn't using. And that's how Form Trends kind of began. It was like, I've got a bunch of content. Let me just repurpose this. And, I've got all the visuals. I've got what I need. I'll just make this into an article in its own right. And
what year was that when the Form Trend was born? What was Form Trend? What year was that?
Form Trends was 2012. Form Trends took me about a year to kind of, I'm a perfectionist. It's my downside. I got to say, it's not a quality. It's not a good quality of being a perfectionist because you're always like, I could do better. I could do better. And because of that nagging little bit in the back of your head, you just don't get done what you need to get done.
Yeah.
And that's my downfall, is that I'm too much of a perfectionist. So I'm trying to kind of, scale that back, realize that something done is better than something perfect, because at the end of the day, nothing's ever perfect.
No.
So you just have to do the best of what you can do with the time that you've got, and that's it. And I think, had I had that mentality back then, I would have launched it sooner, and I would have built it, from the ground up, and fixed things along the way. Because when I launched it, I had content that was almost a year old in there, that was just stupid. But it was a good learning experience, no doubt.
But at least you're your own boss, and you have complete artistic freedom, right?
Yeah, that was the thing. It was like, I mean, I knew what I wanted to do and how to do it, and how to do it better than what I felt the competition was doing. And ultimately, yeah, I made a name for myself. I ran that title for almost 10 years. I would have kept doing it. But the thing is, it's being your own boss is great, but it's also, massively challenging, right? It's like the online journalism game is one thing, but that's changed massively in the last decade. I mean, when I started out, I went out, and one of the reasons I think I grew so quickly is because I understood the social media game. And that's one of the biggest, changes in our generation in terms of getting yourself out there in terms of communication. Social media changed the playing field for everyone. Everybody's at the same now. You could be a Bentley, you could be a startup manufacturer. You have the same, audience, the same resources. And to a certain degree, right? Because if you're a big automotive giant with an unlimited budget, nothing's ever unlimited, but with a bigger budget, you can obviously pay and do things. And if you're a smaller kind of startup, maybe you don't have that bigger budget and therefore can't amplify your message as much as possible. But if you take that amplification and paid campaigns out of the equation, you're level, right? It's all down to the content that you create, and the message that you put out there. And so I think that right now it's having all of these different social channels available, all this, the internet just opened up a world of opportunity for people in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So all right, so let's review. You're your own boss, you have your own freedom of artistic content, you're well known, so you can talk to any designer you choose, basically, I would say. So it seems to be like quite a different job now. It's like when Hyundai enters the picture. So how did it come about?
So, like I said, being your own boss and running your own business sounds great and glamorous, but there were peaks and troughs, and um, so I wasn't just. You got to remember, I'm doing this by myself. Yeah. So when I was 30 years old, I was like, this is fantastic. I'm writing, I'm photographing, I'm shooting videos, I'm running around, sitting in airports, lounges, going on various different trips to different shows. Meanwhile, my daughter is growing up and I'm not around. And then I'm like running around all over the place. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is great. It's a good month. Other times I'm like, well, it's not I haven't really made that much above my rent. And and I'm seeing all these things happening. And yeah, look, the freedom it afforded me, I was able to take time off and spend it with my kids when they were young and, off school and all that. But at the same time, it was massively challenging to the point where I had to branch off and do other things. One of the things I did was recruitment, and the other thing that I did was just selling services, right? As you say, I'd been in this business for a long time. I kind of knew what it is that I was doing in terms of, communications. And so I started pitching, and I'd worked with a couple of different companies doing things, just on a project basis. And so one day I basically picked up the phone to Luck Donckerwolke, whom I've known for a long time, basically since, the car design used days. And I called him initially just to pitch him services, just be like, hey, Luke, how you doing? I hear you got this new job over there at Hyundai. I'm pitching him design communications, and he basically was interested in what it is that I was saying. And ultimately, he said, you know what? There's no one that does this in-house. What do you think about joining the organization? And I thought about it, for about 4 months, basically, because
Wow.
I was like, I really like being my own boss, but at the same time, I've been doing this for a decade. I've seen what it can do. I either need to scale and ramp up massively, to be able to continue doing what I'm doing, because it's not sustainable otherwise, or I could take this new opportunity and really see what's on the other side of the fence where I've never worked and explore that. And for me, I'm always about exploration. I mean, it's like a new discovery for me that was well worth it. And again, like I'd been doing something else for a decade, so I was like, let's try something new for a change.
Okay.
Work for a massive company. I've never done that before. Do something in house, be able to really, work with 3 amazing brands at the moment, others as well, but we can't talk about that. But I mean, from a motor vehicle perspective, there's a lot happening at the Hyundai Motor Group, right? We've got Hyundai, we've got Kia, and of course we've got Genesis, the luxury brand, where I'm spending a lot of my time now because it's such a new brand and there's loads of things to do.
Okay, so
But
yeah,
there's
let's
other
recap.
companies within this organization as well, which are massively interesting from a mobility space industry. But anyway.
So let's read for our listeners too, who might not know. So Luke is the VP of design
He's
for
the
the
chief
Hyundai Group?
creative officer.
Chief
So
creative.
Luke oversees everything creative within the organization, be it design, brand. So yeah, he's a big shot basically within this
Yeah, I
organization.
would say, and designer of the Lamborghini Murcielago, if I recall, among others.
Yes, yeah. He worked
Yeah,
at Lamborghini, Bentley, and yeah, he's got a
yeah, I think he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
successful track record.
Okay, so right now your title is what exactly at Hyundai? The Hyundai Group, I should say.
So I'm working specifically in Luke's team.
Okay.
And there's other teams. Obviously, there's a PR and a communications team within Hyundai and within Kia and within Genesis. I'm more in the creative zone. So
Okay.
my boss is Luke Donckerwolke. So
Okay.
the way that I my role is PR and communications.
PR and communication.
It started off as design communications, but it's more PR. I manage anything that comes inward in terms of interviews, presentations, internal and external. I advise in terms of motor shows or product launches or whatever it may be. Mostly though, I'm involved more on the creative side, so concept cars, things like that. More forward facing, more strategic as well. So
would you say you're his voice internally and externally? As from a communication perspective, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I've never enjoyed being the mouthpiece, because you hear that or you read that, when you're reading this spokesperson. But yeah, essentially that is what I am. I don't, when I'm conveying messages and decisions, these aren't mine ultimately. Right. They're made from above and then, handed down, and sometimes perhaps influenced a bit by me, just because, I know this space. Sure. And Luke is extremely, he's a great person to talk to, because again, you can align with him. Obviously, he's making the ultimate decision, because that's who he is. He's my boss, right? But he's very receptive to input and creative input, in terms of, ways to promote the organization, what topics to consider, what to do from a visual perspective, as well as, from a wordsmith perspective. So he gives me a lot of freedom as well, which is not typical within this organization, I feel. Maybe it's categoric as well, because when some people get to a certain level, again, like we were talking about Chris Bangle earlier, but Luke, ultimately, he realizes that he hired me for a reason, right? So he gives me a lot of basically freedom to do what it is that I came here to do. And I'm always going to check it with him first, just to make sure that we are aligned, because the last thing I want to do is to do something that he's like, why are we doing this? But yeah, it's important to be able to know that he trusts you, and there was a few occasions where I just had to basically make a call, and I apologized afterwards. I was like, look, sorry, this was just necessary, and he was like, no, that's fine. So
I mean, he's the head of hundreds of designers, 3 brands and more, I guess, across 3 continents. So how do you make sure that his communication is distilled down to everybody else? Because that sounds like a really big job.
Yeah, so that is a challenge. But anytime Luke is referenced, this is the way that it is, and it has to be. It has to come through me, because otherwise, you're going to get some disjointed stuff that's happening. And so anytime it's like a quote from him, or, he's saying something, everything comes through me. So when we're doing films and scripts, and he doesn't really work from scripts, to be honest. So my job's pretty easy from that perspective. But, you want to know what messages to target and to include in that film, right? But yeah, Luke is very much about authentic, and reading a script, especially if it's like words that he's come across better in written form than in spoken form. Sometimes you really need to. So like I said, I know him pretty well. We've worked together for now over a year, and I can kind of know what words to put into his mouth, so to speak. But at the same time, it's more about key messages, what it is that we need to deliver, and then Luke will find ways to deliver that and alter the script if necessary, again, because he doesn't work on scripts and he usually just wings it.
Okay. Like if I think back to my GM days, right? Like for example, Cadillac was art and science back in the day. I'm not sure what they are today. Does Luke tell you Hyundai is this and go figure it out, or do you guys have a discussion? How does that go?
So no, generally, we're basically, there's a design language for each brand, right? For Genesis in particular, it's athletic elegance. So athletic elegance is still kind of open to interpretation, but we have a brand team, that basically works on defining what all of those elements are and how to interpret those. And so when you interweave bits from brands, bits from design when you're creating and formulating this message. It's not something that, I just go at it alone. Like I said, it's a big organization. There's a lot of different cogs in this, at work here, and we're all kind of feeding this one wheel.
Not too much of a shock from running your own business to being like a billion-dollar corporation.
No, I mean, it's, I don't know if it's shock is the right word. It's different. But it's also, I feel like, when I was running my company, I had my wife, and that was it. That was my sounding board, and I had some friends and stuff, but mostly it was just us, which was great. But at the same time, it was like, we couldn't share and, delegate, none of that, or have like, bouncing back ideas over multiple people from multiple different perspectives, know about what it's like in this market and that market culturally. And there's so many different variables, right? So when you start to work for a larger organization like, the Hyundai Motor Group, and you realize that there are entities in India, in China, in the US, in Europe, in, everywhere, in Korea, of course. And so, yeah, it's I think it's great when you're trying to basically formulate that message, that you have a lot of different people to count on and to give their feedback on and perspective on.
Do you feel that in your job, Luke is the chief design officer, do you feel that your job is to message what design stands for the rest of the company, or is that like culturally understood that design is really strong? Because when you look at Hyundais and Kias lately, I mean, it's really, really ballsy. In my opinion, it's great. I love the cars. So how do you feel it's more internally or to project externally, I guess is the question.
No, I think it's more internal, actually, because because once we're as a team, right? Once design in particular is confident in what it is that they're doing, and you're given, like I said, Luke, trusts me, but also the executive chair, Yusen Chung is basically a descendant of the original founders of the Hyundai Motor Company. So it's a family business for him, and he also is very trusting of Luke. Which is just, that's really what makes it happen, right? Because if Luke and Sang-yup, and everybody is confident in the message, in the designs that they're creating, then for us, from a communications perspective, it's quite easy then to say, this is what we are. And we're not going to, try to sugarcoat it or whatever. It's like, either you like it or you don't. We realize that some of these designs are going to be polarizing, but we're not an everyman brand, in particular Genesis, right? We don't want to appeal to everyone. If you like it and you understand the design, you can appreciate it, then we want you to be one of our customers. But if not, then maybe the brand's not for you. Maybe maybe you should look elsewhere.
And I think that's the way to go. If you try to appeal to everybody, nobody will be happy anyway. So you might as well do your own thing, and people don't like it, fair. But people who do like it, I think they'll create a strong emotional connection.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, choosing to purchase a car isn't just about design as much as we'd like to think. It's obviously, the usability of the product, the user experience on board, what it looks like, the material quality, the overall quality, the warranties, and showing how much you believe in the product as a manufacturer, right? The service capabilities, the fact that Is it economical or not? Is it fun to drive? Like all sorts of different things, right?
Do you get involved into those discussions, like down to the brochure, Hyundai stands for this and
Yeah,
says,
for sure.
yeah, you
Like,
do. Okay.
yeah, I mean, Hyundai, like the brochures is like a huge thing. Anything that's communications. And so communications, like we were talking a little earlier before we, hit the record button. Communications for me is not just about crafting words. For me, the majority of what I do is visual communications. Because, especially going back to the social media age, people have short attention spans. They're not going to sit through and read even a paragraph, maybe, forget about like 1,000 words online, right? So you got to show them something that is appealing. And as the old adage goes, picture's worth 1,000 words, man. If you can communicate what you need to in a photograph or an animation or moving image, and you can do that without anybody having to say anything, you're hitting every single market and every country in the world by creating those images. And that's it. And that's what I think is massively important for people to consider now, that communications is far more than writing and speaking. I mean, for example, before I started this job, I'd done a couple of presentations where, at art center and things, where I spoke to, aspiring car designers and, about what was going on and how to break into the role and things, just because I'd, worked in such a different, varied array of areas in automotive design. So, but I always hated public speaking. I'm not very comfortable at doing it. And ultimately, people say, yeah, picture the people naked. That doesn't work. You just have to be, ultimately, you just have to be confident in what it is that you're doing and saying. That's it. You go up there and you say, I know what I'm talking about. If these guys want to hear it, fine. And if they don't, that's okay. But I think also, you can't, it's about being confident. So therefore knowing your craft, but also, having a little bit of a sense of humor as well. There's this one guy that I read, or rather I watched something about on him recently. His name is Mohammed Kwantani. And he's like a public speaker, basically. He came up with the power of he had this video, rather, but the power of words and how negative words and positive words and have an impact and a lasting impact on people, even if it's just casually, even if it's just subtle, even if it's just one word. And yeah, but the way that he delivered that speech was the humor aspect of is not lost on him, because it was brilliant. Like he could have been a stand-up comic.
Yeah, public speaking is well, that's what we do at our club. It's a craft, but it's something you work on, right? So
Yeah.
do you write speeches for like Luke or anybody else in your company to speak in public? You do.
Yes. So again, it all depends on how much of it gets used. But some executives will want a teleprompter and will want to read, so they don't forget anything. But yeah, I mean, it is a bit of speech writing. You need to
This is interesting, especially for our audience.
Yeah.
So how do you craft a speech quickly and not, do you have a goal in mind? How do you work it?
Yeah, of course. So ultimately, when a speech is being delivered, is because we have a message to say. So you write down like several key messages in bullet points, and then you build them and work around that. And then for me, it's kind of like writing an article. I always used to do the introduction first, or last, or rather. I would write the body of the text first, and then I would come back and I'd write the intro and how would that feed into it, and then conclude it.
Okay, same here.
Yeah, and so it's a lot easier that way. But in terms of speech writing, it's, you need to breathe. That's like one of the things, like when in speech writing, I think you need to, so it's kind of like the bullet points, right? Between those bullet points, there's some room, there's a breath, there's some space where you allow, that what you've just said, that paragraph, that statement, that message to kind of sink in a little bit and be delivered. It's the same in, I watch a lot of stand-up comedy. I
Yeah.
love stand-up comedy. And what they do is also, it's its own craft, but it is very similar in the sense that if they write a bit, right, regardless of how long it is, they write a bit, and then you have to wait because there's going to be applause or there's going to be a reaction, and you need to let the audience absorb that and feedback and then continue into your bit. And the speech writing or doing a presentation is the same way. If you have something, you need to, especially if you want it to be impactful, you need to let that sit for a minute, give it space to breathe, and then come back and continue.
Yeah, I was always telling people, especially at our club, you don't speak 100 miles an hour all the time. You have to make a point. You have to make a strategic pause.
Yeah.
And or like when the analogy I did was when you do like a Canson drawing. So you have a red piece of paper to make a Ferrari, for example. You don't marker everything up. You just let the red pop through because that's the whole point. You need the red. So I think it's the same thing for a speech. You need those strategic pauses and stuff to get your point across. Otherwise, you're not going to get your point across. So yeah, same thing. Definitely understand that. How many people work for you? Do you have a team now?
So as an organization, we have 5 people working directly for Luke, but it's such a new team. I was employee number 1. So it's going to take some time.
Number 1 what?
Yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed the startup, the startup phase, I guess. You're laying the groundwork, and then, once it's super exciting, especially if you have carte blanche, you can do whatever you want, and people appreciate your input and your value your opinion, and then you can make some changes and lay the groundwork for something that's going to evolve and be hopefully very successful later on. But yeah, so we're growing. I'm actually looking to hire some people as well in terms of visual communications, because I think that's very necessary again in this day and age, and certainly for what I do.
So you're based out of Frankfurt, right? Is that correct?
Yes. So my office is here, on the east side of Frankfurt.
East side. Is your team with you in Frankfurt, or are they scattered across the globe? Because obviously Hyundai is a global company.
Yes. So my team is mostly here.
Okay.
Because Luke is here in Europe for the most part. He travels to Korea frequently, but we have some, shall we say, because we're a big company, we have some players and some extended members, not of our team, but people that we work with in other departments across the company that are based in the US or based in Korea, and particularly in Korea because that's the HQ, that's the headquarters. So there's a lot that happens there. That's where the design centers are as well. When we've got a design center here in Europe for Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis, as well as in the US, but the hub and the main design center is still in Korea.
Obviously, you have a deep understanding of car design, right? Are the people on your team attuned the same way, or did you have to teach them a few things about the business?
No. So one of our team members is Alberto, is a former designer, actually worked at Cadillac.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he worked at GM for a while. So yeah, he's a designer, but he's more on the strategy side now. So he's planning, ways to, I guess, get the message across, and, events to attend, and what we can do in terms of boosting the brand. There's a lot of different things on his plate at the moment. Sue is a color and trim designer, so also background is fashion, but is automotive as well. Nice. And still design. And Mauro is a product designer, so
so they're all designers
from that space. Yeah, so I mean, mostly it's designers. Everybody is a designer, except for some of the coordinators on the team. Obviously, being a Korean company, we have certain people that come over from Korea to help us get things done from being based in Europe. And because they know the company and they know the people back in Korea, it's easier for them to get things done. And they liaise and they do things outside of the daily work that, or the visionary work that we're doing as part of a design team. And so I'm really the only one that's not a trained designer. I didn't go to school for design.
Right.
I just happened to fall into it and enjoy that part of what I do. But I'm not, like, that's the thing. People always think I'm a designer. And I remember I was talking to somebody a while back now, and they were like, you're a designer. And I said, no, I'm not a designer. I've never studied design, automotive or otherwise. I've never studied design in my life. But I'd been doing it for so long. And he said, yeah, you're a designer.
There you go. I would say it's the same thing.
So I don't mind it. Yeah. I mean, but I'm not. I used to draw, full disclosure, I used to draw cars in my books as a kid, but I was never really supported. I went to good schools, but I was never supported in that creative capacity. I remember vividly one time I was drawing, I think it was French history class. I was drawing cars in the notebook and I got a piece of chalk thrown at me because I wasn't paying attention.
Well, you found another creative outlet, right? What you do is highly creative as well.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I know we're coming up the hour, so there's a couple of things I would like to ask. So, as we know, you've met a lot of designers, like a lot of chief designers. So my question to you would be, you don't have to name names. So of the designers you met, who are the most effective communicators and how did they communicate? Because obviously some of them have a small team, but like Luke, as I said, there are hundreds of designers. So how are they able to push their vision forward to other people?
Okay, so you mean internally, or you mean internally now?
Yeah, or internally, or of the people you met, who do you think were the most effective communicators and how or why?
Okay, so there's I think there's two elements to your question, right? Because one, as a journalist, I met a lot of designers, but I'd never worked for any of them.
Right.
Right. And so there's a difference there. And I think that really is important to note.
Yeah. But, they could articulate their vision to you, to other people effectively, or not effectively at all. Right.
Well, I think, the person that someone is in front of a journalist that can do certain things for them in terms of visibility and in terms of promotion is different than the person that you get in the studio when they haven't slept for 3 days and this project is past the deadline and is over budget. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's a little bit different. I mean, I've met some people that I thought were like super cool and like really nice, down to earth people, and then you hear horror stories about what they're like to work for, and how you'd never want to be on their team because they would just cut you down and belittle you. And the stress within that organization. So I would not want to be in that environment, but at the same time, the guy seemed perfectly nice when I was talking with him on the show stand, right? So, but I think like an effective communicator, one has to, well, there's certain elements. There's, he has to vocalize what it is that he wants. So therefore, it's necessary for, if they need something changed, they need to be clear about what that change is. Sometimes, because we're talking design, it's a visual communication. It's like, I don't need this, I need this. And, and then that is understood because they speak the same language, right? But ultimately, it's about clarity, it's about transparency, it's about, I always like to put myself in other people's shoes, right? And kind of think, I don't know who this person is or what they're going through. So I need to really present this in a way that, is crystal clear, is there's no room for error. And I'm not gonna, try to belittle this person or, make it seem like he doesn't understand. I'm going to, just make sure that he does in certain ways. And that is, just obviously speaking, being clear, and also being on the level where, you open it up to a dialogue, right? Because if somebody is afraid like of you as a person, right? If you come in and you're like, I'm a big designer, man, and like, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do. Okay, understood. All right. And you leave, maybe they didn't understand, right? Yeah. So you want to make sure that you're accessible enough so that if people need to push back and say, hold on, what is it that you meant there? Because I interpreted it this way. Is this what you mean? Because otherwise, it's a big problem, because it could be that your interpretation is not the correct interpretation, or the interpretation that your boss wanted you to have. And so, you really just, I'm not going to say I've never had that problem, but I am very open, always super transparent. Some people like it, some people don't. Sometimes I'll rub people the wrong way because I just say what's on my mind always.
At least I like that.
And I like that much better than having to figure out what you meant. And British people, sorry if anybody from Britain is watching, especially the northern guys, you don't say what you mean. And I don't like that.
I was gonna say that's more of your American side coming through. No,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. There's no time. Who's got time for that? Like, I'm not a mind reader. Tell me what you mean.
I hear you. Okay. And the thing I want, last question was, all right, if somebody likes, what you're doing or the career path and wants to explore about doing PR or in design or anywhere else, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Wow. So like, I don't know. I mean, for PR in particular, I'm probably a bad person to ask because, and my wife hates it when I say this, but I chose various different paths that ended up being strategic to end up where I am now. Yeah. But I never really, that wasn't my goal. Right. I ended up there. Yeah. So my ultimate, and so I always tell people, I just kind of fell into this. And she's like, no, you didn't. You worked your ass off for, 15 years to do what it is that you do.
I would agree more with her. I think it's, you lay down the foundation, like you built your skills, right? Job after job. And it's like it's called the talent stack. You learn about writing, you learn about design, you learn about photography. And then at some point, they all mesh to do the job you do now. So I understand how you can think that you fell into it, but I think each job you did was building up to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that ultimately is the message, right? It's, if you find something that you love to do, like for me, I loved talking, I loved cars, I liked writing. I loved the moving image, like movies and film, TV. I mean, I worked, when I was in San Diego, I worked for Second Unit for a production company where Second Unit is basically like stunt work and shots like behind the scene. Like if you're a main actor in a television show, for example, but we don't want to pay your wages, we're going to get a stand-in to do an over-the-shoulder shot of you looking at your computer. So we don't have to pay you, the main actor. We will instead pay a stunt double. And so Second Unit comes in to do that over the shoulder shot. So anyway, but I ended up doing a lot of the things that I liked doing, and I did well at them because I enjoyed doing them.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it just, those various bits of my life and my past jobs and, choices ended up putting me where I am now. But I always enjoyed it. Like, I really like what I do. At the end of the day, that's the only way you're going to get really good at it, at something, is if you do it because you enjoy it. And then you don't look at, oh, what time is it? Oh, I don't want to be working. It's Saturday or whatever. It's like, I just did it because I enjoyed it. And if it needed to be done, it got done.
Yep. And I think that's a nice way to end our conversation. So Eric, I heard you're off to Korea now.
I will be tomorrow. Yeah. Today I
Wow.
still have a little bit of time. I get to relax and do some packing later.
Well, thank you very much for joining our podcast. That was a really interesting conversation. Could probably talk to you for another hour or two, but I don't want to, do that too much. Okay, so once again, thank you, Eric, for joining us on the podcast. Once
Thank
again,
you.
my name is Pierre, and this was the Heart of England Speakers podcast. Come and join us live every first and third Thursday of the month. Until the next time, bye bye.